Hey, what's up? My name is Rob Payon, and welcome to the Proof of Talent podcast, the show where we talk about everything related to the career journey within the blockchain, crypto, and Web3 space. Today, we have Calder Zwerling on, who is the head of talent at OpenSea, as well as a strategic advisor on talent for Variant Fund, an early stage investor within the Web3 space. And today's show, it's pretty broad in terms of the topics that we cover, both helping out and providing a ton of fantastic advice for people involved in hiring within the space, whether you are a CEO, an executive within the recruiting or talent function, or somebody who just participates in interviews. We cover a lot of really applicable stuff on that end, as well as for candidates that are looking for opportunities within the space. There is some direct, actionable advice, as well as some really good information to think about how talent leaders really conceptualize and think about hiring, and also how to see how somebody who's very professional, a company like OpenSea, a talent leader like Calder, how they structure their hiring internally, think about some of these really important components to recruiting the best talent possible. Before we hop into today's episode, if you are looking for that next opportunity within the crypto or Web3 space, if you're thinking about making a move, please feel free to reach out to the Proof of Talent team. We have a number of recruiters in the team ready to help you to make that move. I'll put a link below in the YouTube and podcast description. Alternatively, if you're one of those folks that is looking to actively grow and scale your team, we've helped 50 plus companies at this point in time directly within the industry to do so. So feel free to reach out to us as well. I will have another link in the YouTube podcast description for you. Without further ado, let's hop into that conversation with Calder Zwerling, head of talent at OpenSea, as well as strategic advisor for Variant. You have an extensive background in the recruiting and talent acquisition space, spanning really from the staffing world all the way to the largest of tech companies to now the crypto Web3 space. The previous role to where you're at right now, you spent, I think, 7 years at Facebook. What was it like going from Facebook to where you're at now with OpenSea?
It was definitely a pretty big change, but that was what I was looking for and what I was really hoping for. Like I said, I spent about 7.5 years at Facebook. I had a great time over there. But after that time, I was ready for just a different kind of scope of work. I felt like a lot of the stuff we were doing at that point was a lot of optimizing, right? And so much of the process and the teams and stuff were built, and it was really just about improving, the success of hiring there. And so while I enjoyed that and I got some great experience, building and optimizing over there, I wanted to get back to some of like the actual build, the 0 to 1, the earlier like stage recruiting problems, because I just found them a little bit more like exciting to me at the time. I had worked at a smaller company called Path in the past before, and I think we were about maybe 45 people when I was there. And so just that level of ownership and speed and kind of opportunity to have a significant impact was something that was really appealing to me and something I enjoyed. And thus, why I ended up making the move over to OpenSea. The scope of work is a little bit different, especially when I first came on board, right? I was I think we were about 25 people when I joined, and I was the first person within any ballpark of HR. And so I was doing, not just recruiting, but visas and onboarding and HR and IT support, which is scary for the company's sake. I was not very technologically advanced. I mean, I was just setting up, Google Suite and Notion and getting people computers and Slack and all that jazz. All I could really do was unlock someone when they were walked out of their G Suite. That's pretty much the extent of my tech support. But fortunately, quickly we hired experts across all those areas to kind of take some of that stuff off my plate and let me really just focus on the recruiting. So that was just a little bit about me getting going over here.
When you were looking at that next move, how did you evaluate and choose OpenSea as the kind of the next place you wanted to go to?
Yeah. So when I was looking, I tried to be really intentional just because, again, I hadn't looked for like 7.5 years. I wanted to cast a wide net just to see what options were out there. And then just, kind of through my process, hone down on which role felt right for me. So I talked to some, Web2 companies. I talked to some Web3 companies. I was really, interested, in Web3, and things were really like blowing up across the board. NFTs in particular, I just saw a real like use case that made sense for me and like, a great value add and a potential, huge impact and huge opportunity. And so I actually talked to former Proof of Talent podcast guest, Greg Clayman. Greg and I had crossed paths at Zynga back in the day when I worked a short contract over there. And knowing Greg was, at the time at A16Z and had a pretty good understanding of crypto, I grabbed some time with him just to get his like lay of the land and how he saw things and many interesting opportunities that came up. And he had mentioned OpenSea, and which I'd heard of before. So he got me connected with Devin, as our CEO and co-founder. And, just from the first conversation with him, the way that he thought about, his people, his vision, the company, the team, and the trajectory of where we were going, it was just like a breath of fresh air. It was just really I really clicked with him and connected with him and appreciated how he communicated and worked through stuff. So came through the process as I met, our other co-founder, Alex, and the other early members of the OpenSea team. The vibes were right and the work was exciting. And, I thought NFTs were booming back then when we were doing like 100 million a month, and then stuff really started to kind of get crazy 2, 3, 4 months after I joined.
Yeah, it's quite the journey. Big shout out to Greg Clayman, probably one of my favorite leaders in the space. I know we're also mutually connected with Shannon. She's former head of recruiting at Coinbase. Yeah, man, obviously a very inspiring background within talent. I mean, you join OpenSea, you're at 25 people. Talk to us a little bit more about the process and growth phase of OpenSea and just some of the skills you had prior to joining the team and how that helped the success and growth of the organization.
Yeah, I think one of the things that, from the recruiter's perspective that helped, us grow, well, a couple of things, like one from my perspective and what I kind of brought in was, when I was at Facebook, I worked on 2 teams mainly over there, the front end engineering team and then like the AR/VR, now FRL specialized suite team. And so the front end engineering team was very pipeline based hiring. We're looking for just like the best JavaScript, UIEs, front end engineers that you could find. And there was a pretty just like generic rec that we're working off of and building a pipeline there. Whereas when I came and worked on some of the AR, VR, FRL stuff, it was a lot more rec based hiring, specialized stuff that couldn't kind of come from the pipeline. So seeing, the difference in recruiting strategies and how things are set up and how you align a team were really important, right? Because here at OpenSea, we did some pipeline stuff. We had the larger pipelines like, back end or infra or front end or whatever it was, full stack engineers. And then we did a lot of, one-off hiring, legal roles or product design or marketing or finance or whatever it was as well too. So I think that, definitely helped, for me, just having that perspective of understanding how to structure and kind of set up things there. And then, some other things that really just accelerated the hiring. One was just the market back then, right? We would be naive not to say that really played a huge factor in us scaling as quickly as we could, right? If you rewind 2.5 years ago, the economy was humming along. Crypto was like, the golden child in tech. Everyone was so excited about it. Our transaction volume was really, blowing up and taking off. So we had a really compelling and exciting story. And, a lot of these people coming from some of these, top tier FANG or large companies were excited about taking the risk, going somewhere smaller and trying to have some, larger impact at a smaller company. So that was, definitely, facilitating a lot of our growth. And then, also just the support that we had from the OpenSea leadership team just around hiring. They put a really like fierce level of prioritization, within their schedules, within their time, moving anything that they needed to around on their calendar to accommodate recruiting to help us out, understanding the speed and the urgency that we need to move at, as well as just the thoughtfulness and quality around talking about a role and kind of pitching a candidate. So I think the connection and confluence of all those things kind of really coming together, the wider market coupled with what we could control and how we were showing up really just enabled us to accelerate hiring at a pretty quick manner.
Yeah, I'm sure it was a crazy time and a little bit different to where we're at now. And going off that point, how have things changed from a like overall hiring standpoint or strategy standpoint? Because I feel like right now there is obviously the macro environment has shifted, but even if you're getting like micro, Twitter isn't necessarily always real life, but I feel like even the NFT world in specific is going through its like first bear market ever and having its own little, not crisis of confidence, but maybe crisis of confidence for some people.
Yeah.
How has that maybe affected just like the hiring landscape? Has that presented any unique challenges as you continue to maybe slowly grow the team or add talent within internally?
Yeah, I mean, I think when we look at, now, like, again, it's just not the people who don't know it about us aren't coming running to us. In the past, we had this big brand. I think people assumed, oh, here's a quick IPO or opportunity or cash out, this, that, the other thing. They got excited about the team and saw that, but they weren't as committed to like the mission, what we were really building, or really seeing the value or the excitement in that. Now everyone who's coming to us really does believe in like where we're going, where we're building, the opportunity, the NFTs. And so I think in a way, it really helps to ensure that we're bringing the right people on board. The bear markets is like some of the best times to build. We can really just like put our blinders on and really focus on like our OKRs, our goal, as goals as a company. Whereas when things were blowing up, it was so much firefighting, which can be exhausting, right? Like this is broken, this, pulling into war rooms and quickly hash things out in a matter of hours or days. It can definitely take a toll, where now we get to be like, as a company, a lot more strategic on like, here's what we want to invest in, here's how we want to build, and just focus on that, and not so much the ups and downs of the daily or the weekly volume and stuff, because you could just go crazy watching those charts if that's all you're thinking about, and so I know at OpenSea, we're really committed to building a trusted and reliable, platform that is accessible to so many. And so just really kind of staying, focused on that, ensuring that the people that we are interviewing, whether they're coming through applications or sourced or referred candidates, are aligned with that mission, that vision, and have that their own, maybe why they're interested in OpenSea story. Because that's one thing that we definitely are really like double clicking on these days, just to make sure that these are people who are really coming to us because they believe in the vision, the culture, and where we're trying to go longer term.
What are some of the ways you determine that kind of real, true interest in OpenSea? Are there specific questions that you ask, or is that something you just kind of get a gut feel for? Because I feel like that's a lot of things now, especially like you really do need that true level of passion and intention when you're searching for somebody on the team now.
Yeah.
Curious what you might do, or the higher managing team might do at this point in time to help determine that.
Yeah. I mean, on our application forms, we have, why are you interested in this role and why you're interested in OpenSea? And we've gotten pretty good at picking out the chat GPT prompts from people who are actually writing down like why they're interested in OpenSea, So there's definitely that, for the applications, we can kind of get a sense there. But even, whether it's a source candidate or applied candidate or referred candidate, like as a team, we sit down and understand like why Web3 for them. What drew them to OpenSea? What NFTs they excited about? Have they set up a wallet? What use cases in particular are they, really excited about kind of longer term, to make sure they can have like a more nuanced discussion about it. It's not about getting a right answer, like there's a lot of correct answers here. It's just about being able to really tell the story and, share their why beyond, hey, I saw you on YC's top company list, right? And so again, that's great for some people. That gets us on the radar for many people. But our hope is maybe those people see us, then they do their research a little bit, buy an NFT, learn what we're doing, have a favorite project or a use case, and then can come to us and apply and say, hey, here's what I've been building, here's what I'm using, here's what I love, and those are kind of the backgrounds and perspectives that we're really hoping to bring on board. Now, everyone doesn't have to be like a DGen. And I think it's important for us not to only hire DGens, right? Like if we only hire DGens, we're only building from that perspective. And, collectively as a company, I think, for NFTs to go to the next level and go mainstream, we need to make sure we're catering to far more than just the DGen perspective. So I don't mean to say everyone's got to be a DGen, but, I think just having some familiarity of NFTs as a whole, what we're building and where we're going, and some conviction in that really goes a long way in not just succeeding through our interview process, but being successful when you join OpenSea.
Yeah, I think time and time again, we see that the best candidates position themselves through research and passion, right? And obviously someone like your team, I'm sure you guys are getting overwhelmed with a lot of different applications. So being able to filter through that noise is really important. And I think going back to a point you said as well, you mentioned that there's a huge buy-in from the leadership team. Can you talk to us about just the importance in general of like coaching and advising your hiring managers to make sure you guys are actually bringing on the top talent in a timely and efficient manner?
Yeah, I mean, we've been really fortunate that, as a leadership team as a whole, there's a continued prioritization and emphasis on it. And when you're working with hiring partners, I think it's really critical to set and align on clear expectations from like that first initial call as you're scoping out, right? Like scoping out, what you're looking for in the role, what the expectations are, what's necessary, specific skill sets, interview process, like getting as granular as what each interviewer is going to be asking and what those questions are. The more time that you really spend at the top of those early stages, investing and building the hiring process, the quicker and more successful and efficient it's going to be. There's definitely some times when we kick off searches and we're not really sure what we want. We intentionally keep it broad and want to bring some folks through and just kind of see how it goes to help, kind of scope and shape the role. But the reality is, the scoping out in the early alignment, it just gets so critical, because it gets the interview panel aligned, it gets the hiring team aligned, it gets the department leader aligned, and then us in recruiting, we've got the correct vision from the jump of what we're really looking for. And then ideally you're not spinning our tires too long, just throwing a bunch of spaghetti at the wall and hoping something sticks. We can be really strategic and thoughtful on who we're going after and how we approach them and how we want to engage our hiring partners to engage these candidates potentially. So I think really just like setting the expectation, with our hiring partners, the more you put in, the more you're going to get out, and at the end of the day, I think, these hiring partners just want to fill the role as quickly, as efficiently as they can. That's what's going to lead to that, and really emphasizing the information, the data, the context that you need is so critical when you're working with hiring partners and scoping out roles early.
I think it's a really good point, and it's something that we find pretty consistently is that the companies that put in a significant amount of upfront work or more upfront work than others, they will save on the back end of the process, because I think the trend typically happens to be that some companies will go into a hiring process, not put a lot of upfront effort into it, maybe not have a job description or even really a strong concept of what the role is or what the person they're looking for, who that person might be. And then you spend hours upon hours interviewing people, reviewing resumes, doing a bunch of things that you would not have done if you spent a few hours up front of accurately determining who that is. And I think it's really good advice, because it's so frustrating for companies, I think, to spend that time on the back end. They just don't realize how much shorter that would be if they put in an initial upfront effort.
Right. And then it just demoralizes the interviewers and the hiring managers and the recruiting team, because they're not the exact right candidates, or, wasting time. This person wasn't even close, And so I think it really keeps like interviewer, hiring manager, recruiting morale up as well, too, because we can all say, hey, here's the vision. We'll do some market mapping on the role. Here's what we think our target pool is. Let's go after it, as opposed to just saying, hey, I just want a generic role. Let's see what kind of comes back. Because then inevitably recruiting doesn't know how to screen for, or kind of pull in or push out specific candidates. And then we're, putting people in the process that maybe the hiring manager or the interviewers aren't aligned with, just because, again, we have to shoot very broad and just try to kind of cast a wide net. So I think thinking it from the efficiencies of down funnel and the amount of work that it's going to pull off your interviewing and hiring team by doing it early, I think it's so important and really sets a stage for a successful hiring process.
Yeah, it's all about the foundation, I think, for sure. And I think that's something we try and educate, if the founders or people we're working with are open to it, right? I think that's also the biggest part. But I think that's like a great transition into kind of your role over at Variant. I know you guys are a VC. I'd love to learn, how did that opportunity come about, and what are some of your responsibilities over at Variant?
Yeah, so I am a strategic advisor at Variant. I've been there, I think, since December of last year. So, 7 or 8 months or something like that. It's been great. They reached out to me a while ago. I don't know how or when. I can't remember how they got in contact with me or where it kind of came from, but they said they were looking for some advising opportunities, and going back to what made me make the move to OpenSea in the first place is like those early, kind of problems and be doing that 0 to 1 stuff. And so as I met with the team there and understood their vision of, how I could help the portfolio and the portcos, I was like, oh, this is interesting. This is even earlier problems than I was doing at OpenSea, because came to OpenSea, we were 25 folks, right? We had, a CTO, we had, a lot of the critical role, or not a lot of, but we had a few of the critical like leaders and opportunities in place. Well, some of this, conversations I'm having with Variant and Variant Portcos is, how do I hire my, first, engineering, manager or something like that? Or do I need a product designer, our first product designer? And so it's been great just to get back to some of those very, very basics things. A lot of these founders are, young founders who have never built a company, haven't seen this before. They just got, $1 million or whatever to go scale, and they don't understand how to like allocate or align that. So my goal is just to be like advisor or thought partner with them. Anything from, do they need a role? What is the right opportunity? Reviewing a job description or interview process, helping with comp data or connecting them with the right recruiting partner, talking through closing strategy with individual candidates. I just like really whatever they need, I'm there for in like a kind of like a one-to-one kind of support and kind of like on-call basis. We built out too a bunch of materials for them, like for like, how to kick off a rec and like an intake form so it can be consistent. You have all the information. We put together some best practices on pre-briefs and debriefs, which are some things that I'm really like passionate about. I think are really important to like, have a success in recruiting, and then materials around how to pick, executive or search firms to work with. And so it's just trying to be like that one-stop shop for all things until these companies can, get their first recruiting leaders on, if and when they kind of get to that point, and then kind of scale those things out internally. Again, we're investing in them, we're rooting for them, we want them to do well. And so I just want to kind of share any advice they have or remove any roadblocks that they may be running into because hiring can be hard, especially in today's environment, especially for a company that doesn't have maybe a super well-known or reputable brand just yet.
What are some of the most common challenges you see for not just necessarily, I guess, Variant portfolio companies, but those early stage, let's say seed, pre-seed companies within the space where maybe it's 5 people or less? Like what type of challenges do you commonly hear or see them face when it comes to hiring or recruiting?
Yeah, I think getting them to think outside of their network is like the biggest thing, right? At that stage, again, the likely don't have a big recruiting brand or a name brand or anything like that, and so the most effective and efficient way for them to hire is to just connect with people they know and kind of build it out that way. And while I understand that, and that can be a very successful model, you can get in a little bit of a difficult situation where, historically people know people who are like them, and I think it's really critically important to invest in bringing diverse perspectives into the company from the very jump, because the longer you wait, the harder it is going to be to kind of like make up, that gap. And the data shows teams with like diverse makeups and backgrounds, they produce better, and so getting them to kind of maybe get outside their comfort zone in terms of who they're going after, start doing some cold outreach to candidates they might not be connected to, and really reiterating the importance of that, I think is one thing that sometimes they're maybe like a little reluctant to or nervous to do. This is my 6th hire. I need to make sure it's a great person. How could I do that if I don't know them from my network? Well, you can know they're a great person through a very well thought out interview process, and get very, thoughtful in terms of what you're looking for from each section, what the expectations are, and kind of go through it that way. So that's one thing. So let's build out a steady process you can trust. And then let's also build out what's the story of your company, of this role. Where are you at now? Where are you at 6 months? Where are you at 6 years? Like, what's the vision, so that you can have a compelling pitch to share with these prospective candidates, and I would recommend like 140 character version and then a 15-minute version, right? You need something just short and sweet that you can maybe send out in emails just as like a little lure to catch their attention. And then obviously have a little bit more of like a thoughtful, kind of one-to-one rundown where you can really just get them excited about your mission, the work, the culture, the company, and kind of where they're going. So being able to really have a good process and a good pitch is something that we do work on, so that then we can really try to target the market that they aren't already networked with and aren't connected with, because I think it is such a a large market and important to really bring some new perspectives into each company.
I think this is a good opportunity for other VCs as well, just to kind of hear your guys' strategy and also just how hands-on you are with your founders. Can you talk to us a little bit more about just like the consistency of how often you're working with different founders, hiring managers, and advising? Because I feel like that can really make or break, like the venture capital firm they go with, if they're with the right recruiting partner. Like, that can help scale
Absolutely.
immensely.
Yeah. And I mean, just outside of recruiting, even the like marketing support they can get, the legal support, right? I know there's some like large VCs and they're investing so much. I think one of the things that we're really trying to focus on with Variant and as it continues to grow is just be that real boutique focused on Web3, have very like direct, founder to like GP, kind of connections. And then the GPs also like making all the connections, within within Variant of like who can help and support these. It really is like all hands on deck. We're also really trying to get our founders connected pretty significantly, right? Like, because I think there's some like learning they can all do from each other. We've got like a Telegram group that they're all like active in, and hey, I'm trying this software. Have you used it? Or I've run into this issue or this problem. Who's been through something similar or anything like that? And just get a real like organic, group and kind of conversation going and support cycle. And then we're going to build out even like more like specific groups that there'll be we have a recruiting Telegram group where if anyone's running into recruiting problems, we just go in there and we can kind of like group think and work through it. And then similar for other departments as well, marketing and stuff I think will be coming in the not too distant future. So really just like really trying to give that like individual one-to-one, kind of support. And then, just really be really focused on Web3 because all of us at Variant have the conviction, belief in the space. And if we start dabbling in other things, there's a lot going on, like let's just get really good and continue to build what we believe in. And we think that's going to, set up the fund for the best in the long term.
When you were talking recently, you were mentioning crafting a pitch, both kind of a shorter version and a longer version. What do you think, be it for helping portcos with Variant or at OpenSea or just previously, like what makes a good recruiting pitch to a potential candidate?
Yeah. I mean, this might sound a little silly, but I think recruiting should be fun. I think of it a lot like dating, right? If you go on a date with someone and it's just like unengaged and like no fun, it's like, all right, this isn't right for me, wish them the best and kind of move on. So I think within recruiting, I think the process should be engaging. It should be fun. I mean, obviously very serious and you're doing some testing, but like, you want to really put forth a vibe that it's an exciting environment, right? So that's definitely one thing. I think there's the short term and the long term, like visions that you want to tell, right? Like here's immediately what the company is going to be achieving, or here's what our OKRs are. Here's immediately within the role what the OKRs or the goals are, so they can kind of see that. And then, beyond just that 30, 60, 90, what is the longer term vision kind of story for both the company and for the individual as they kind of grow within the role. Now, obviously in startups, like things change very quickly and roles or companies can pivot or adjust strategy, and you just got to be transparent about that. But just sharing like, hey, where things are at today, here's how we're looking at stuff. And then for some people, or for a lot of people, the financials is really important, and having like a succinct story of, here's how we're managing the investments that we have. Here's, the runway that we have. Here's how we're thinking about bringing on potential new investors and partners to extend things or do acquisitions to accelerate things or whatever it is, just continues to give more and more conviction to the company. Like at OpenSea, especially early, when you looked at some of the investors we had, it was just like a who's who of a lot of really great people, and showing that story of, hey, here's the investors, the people who believe it. Here's the use cases that we really see that we're really excited about. Here's our company vision. Here's our team. We would just kind of run through those, and we had, a pretty compelling pitch. And so, building a compelling pitch isn't specific to OpenSea. So many companies can do it, but I think it's important for, recruiting teams and to understand that vision, be able to articulate it. I would, early days of OpenSea, I would sit in on like every recruiting call that Devin had, just so I could hear how he was telling the story of OpenSea, what was important, how he was addressing concerns, so that I could then start infusing those messages or to address those things like earlier in process. So, and even, as we continue to grow, we would have like our recruiting team sit in on calls with Devin or some of the other execs just to hear how they talk. And so I think that can be a really valuable thing to just say, hey, let me be a fly on the wall and hear the story, just to make sure that, earlier in the process of working with candidates, we're telling it the right way. Because, traditionally, I think the founders and the CEOs, they do such a great job of telling stories and getting people inspired and excited about the work, just because they're so deep into it and they know every like nook and cranny of the business, that we in recruiting can pull a lot of those things out and hit some of those same tones throughout the process.
With a lot of the kind of difficulties within the general like tech environment in the past year or so, I think one of the things we've heard is that, kind of like you had alluded to, there's been maybe a little bit more due diligence or selectiveness from candidates when evaluating opportunities. Have you seen uh, a shift in how candidates have been evaluating opportunities because of like the layoffs that have happened and just some of the challenges that companies and candidates have faced when looking at the job market?
Yeah, I mean, anecdotally, from my experience as well as talking to some other, recruiting leaders that I know, not just within like, Web3, but just like, kind of across the board. I do kind of sense candidates indexing a lot more on cash than they were, say, 2-3 years ago. It seemed like, equity was, equities or token was a big, incentive structure, and people were really excited about that. But the stability and like guaranteed cash does seem to be coming up a little bit, more to more, or that tends to be the more of the negotiation point, with candidates. I can understand, right? People want the stability and security and everything like that. So, when it makes sense, we do try to, accommodate that. But at the same time, you can't be breaking your compensation bands or kind of going all out of whack, just to land a, one-off candidates, because that can be so detrimental to like the company and the team and the comp structure kind of longer term. So it is a little bit of a fine line, but anecdotally from what I've seen, it does seem like that's, kind of been the vibe, the last, little bit here.
100%. I mean, also you gotta just look at the runway and just health of a business too. I think that's obviously more important than ever. Despite, all the layoffs that are going on, I think not only are companies taking longer to hire, but candidates are also taking a little bit longer to make their decision. I'm curious, like, we work on some very, I would say, unicorn roles sometimes. Founders are looking for very niche positions that could drag out for like 2 months to 6 months. When we're getting into these later stages of interviews or just timing in general, like what's the kind of the thought process for your hiring managers or founders you're advising, like, to fill that position?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's like, is it realistic to fill this position, right? And like, do some market mapping, right? And I think that you shouldn't wait for 2-6 months like into the search to do this. I think as you're putting the time in earlier to the process, scoping and really understanding and defining the role, that's when ideally recruiting partners should be able to say, hey, here's what the pool is. If we plug in all of your must-haves, there are technically 50 people within, the area that meet the expectations that you're looking for. I mean, we can start with those 50, but you're going to crank through 50 reach outs pretty freaking quickly, and then you're just going to kind of keep like going to that same well. And I mean, there's some things you could do around maybe having the manager directly engage the candidate, but still you're capped at those 50 people in this theoretical situation, And so I think really spending the time to scope the role and say, all right, we'll start with these 50, but then of these must-haves, like what can we cross off the list, right? What can we use to really widen the pool or widen the breadth of our sourcing and recruiting efforts? I think is really important. Again, we're not going to not go after those 50, but we need to have like a tier 2 and tier 3 option just to ensure we've got kind of good candidate flow. Because again, depending on the complexity of the role and the company or the compensation, it's not the candidate might not be out there, with those high level requirements that they're really asking for. So market mapping, I think, is really the biggest thing, of just like showing the story, showing the profiles, so that you can then understand with the hiring partners, all right, where do we adjust, where do we tweak, and how do we make this a little bit more of an open search? And if it's so niche that there isn't these people, all right, can we break this out maybe into 2 roles, right? Maybe, they structure it that way. And if you bring 2 people who are, collectively, kind of, bring that full, support or full experience, that's a good way to go about it and fill the search. So that's what I would recommend is just like market map, show the data, show the story, and then make, data backed decisions based off that.
Yeah. Calder, I'm curious, like, a lot of this conversation has been geared towards founders, geared towards hiring managers. What would be your top 2 to 3 tips for these earlier stage companies to continue expanding their teams, and just a mindful and successful way, just for the contribution of the team and the overall ecosystem?
Yeah, I think one of the things tactically that we did at OpenSea pretty early on was, we implemented pre-briefs and debriefs for every candidate. So before the interview, we would bring the whole interview panel together and say, hey, this is the candidate, this is the role, here's what you're focusing on, here's the signal, here's what you're focusing on, here's the signal, here's what you're focusing on. We'd even have a doc with those questions. So as an interview panel, we are aligned on what we're covering. They have expectations for the role. There's no redundant signal, because everyone's kind of got their clear kind of lanes, and then you can really trust what you get. And so I think that's important, because also, sometimes there's a candidate who maybe fits the mold, but is a little bit outside of it. And you can say, hey, this person's a little bit more senior than we were expecting. So we expect them to be more high level, or maybe they're more junior, so we want them to be more like hands-on, whatever it is. The panel then has the consistent expectations, of the role and how the hiring manager is thinking about it. So pre-briefs are important. And then debriefs, soon after interviews, quick, fast follow, just bring everyone together for 15 minutes to understand what went well, what didn't, what we liked, and then either iterate on the search or move forward with the candidate, right? And so the debrief feedback is so critical for hiring managers, for recruiters, for department leaders to see, to understand like how the role is evolving, whether those candidates are the right candidates, or things need to be kind of adjusted with the strategy, or how things are being that. So that's one thing. And then again, I'll sound like a broken record, but like spend the time up front, right? Like we talked about this earlier, the more time you invest scoping out every aspect of the process, the better it's going to be. And I do think, there's some tools you can use like ChatGPT to like get yourself like kicked off for that, right? You can use ChatGPT to, build a generic job description. You can use ChatGPT to build some of these like interview questions, for example. I wouldn't copy and paste ChatGPT questions or job descriptions, right, and go live with it, right? Like use that as your framework. Hey, I've got, 65% of what I need. Let me work my own kind of context or nuance or approach into it for both the questions and for the job descriptions. But that work, like we talked about, the more you do individually as a hiring manager, the more you're going to save your team time as interviewers, the more you're going to save the recruiting time, and the more you're just going to ensure you've got the right process and the right folks kind of coming through. And you're not going to, after 6 months of searching, realize like, oh, wait, you know what? This role is a little bit different than what I actually, was. Now that I've interviewed some candidates, nice. I realize like it's totally different, right? Like we could have talked about this 6 months ago, and so right. Just spend that time early and because it's going to pay huge dividends down the road.
One thing that you had mentioned in regards to the pre and the kind of post briefs kind of brought to mind the subject of like timing in an interview and timely feedback, because you're having post briefs. There's probably going to be some timing requirements there. Maybe as a last question here for you, I would love to just hear your general thoughts on like interview timeline feedback. If there's anything that you try to have the team at OpenSea stick to, or that you advise smaller companies with the variant to stick to. Just curious as far as your thoughts on that, because I feel like that's something we see people sometimes struggle with.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things we did early on, was like we're trying to, it didn't always work. We were trying to do like same day interview, same day offer. And so we would literally have the candidate interview. We'd have a debrief, soon after the interview, we'd bring the panel together, where the department leaders are on board and hear all the feedback and their supportive decision, and then try to get an offer out to that candidate that same day, just so the conviction and excitement that we have for them, and this was particularly important too, when the market was really crazy and people are moving around like so fast. But while that's a very aggressive goal, I think, again, within 24 hours, having a response and a decision to a candidate is important, just so they know what's going on. They're not left, in the dark. And bringing the interviewing team together while the feedback is most fresh of mind is important, because they could easily do another interview and forget some of the content. If you have an interview on Monday, but you don't debrief till Wednesday, well, they could have an interview on Tuesday with another candidate that muddies the context, or maybe something, a fire pops up and they just aren't like, retaining the, or remembering the information as much as they had. So you're getting like a little bit of a muddied or diluted signal. So we definitely try to do like debriefs the same day, or at the latest, if it's we're interviewing, ending the interview at the end of the day, like first thing the next day, just to really optimize for speed, both for the candidate side and for our side. So, it's easier said than done, but I do think it could really go a long way for the candidate just to feel like, whoa, holy smokes, like this company's really fired up about me. They're excited, they're moving fast, like that, they make quick decisions. I think in a startup world that can appeal to a lot of the people that are interested in going to a startup, that environment, that pace. And so I think putting that prioritization on that and an emphasis on that really goes a long way in moving folks through the process successfully.
A lot of wisdom in this podcast from the recruiting process. And I mean, it's kind of given me the perspective, like, you have to be so much more strategic in the hiring process. Just like you're building a marketing plan or business development plan, it needs to be just as thorough. And so for any founder or investor, VC, whatever it may be, if you're listening, like, really take some notes on a lot of what Calder has mentioned here. And just wanted to say thank you for jumping on the pod. This was, really, really awesome episode.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to do it. I appreciate the invite. So thanks for setting it up, guys.
Yeah, thanks a bunch for all the advice to companies that are hiring right now. I think it's really well structured, and there's just a lot of solid takeaways and really good learning from a vast amount of experience that you have across the industry and just in general. So thank you very much for that.
Of course.